Hello from the GovCIO Media and Research AI Summit. I'm Ross Fortuning, Senior Staff Writer, and I'm here with Christopher Page, Deputy Director of OPNAV's Intelligence Division. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for having me today.
So the Navy has emphasized the need for common AI standards across platforms and mission areas and all that stuff. What does standardization actually mean in practice?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So when I think about our strategy for achieving standardization, there's really three big things that we are doing. One is we're really trying to build a more robust infrastructure of networks and data because we know it needs to be there. We're trying to upskill the workforce, which I actually view as the most important component. I think as people are more familiar, more talented at using AI, a lot of the standardization problems are going to solve themselves. And then, beyond the infrastructure and beyond the workforce is the partnership that we're going to have with industry, with our foreign allies, and with academia. Now that gets to the what. As far as the why, really why this is important to us is that we really want to be able to integrate trustworthy AI into intelligence and the other 6 warfighting functions, one of which is command and control. Now, when I think about then how that is implemented, how it's being implemented within the Navy, I'd like to make sure your audience is aware of Project Overmatch.
Yes.
So Project Overmatch is really the Navy's main contribution to combined/joint all-domain command and control. And what that project, run by a really good friend of mine, seeks to do is to build out the Navy operational architecture, which is really how we're going to bring together our platforms, our weapons, and our sensors to be able to achieve operational effects. Now, while that's going on at the Navy level, at the Department of the Navy level, our CDAO is finalizing a strategy for really weaponizing data and AI. It complements a lot of the work happening at the Navy and Marine Corps level, but I think in an overarching sense, it's going to allow us to get to where we really want to be, and that's with what's called the hybrid fleet, where we've got both manned and unmanned systems that are operating in a very distributed sense, powered by autonomy and not dependent on always-on duplex communications. So pretty excited about that. I'm pretty excited as well as what's happening with back in the Foundry, in that we're trying to really bring AI to bear on the problems of shipbuilding. And whether we're talking about afloat with a hybrid fleet or ashore with the shipyards, we know that what's really going to make a difference is when we've got leadership bought into the idea that the AI that we're delivering is trustworthy. And just like with human decision-making, human analysis, that's going to come from truth and transparency and credibility.
Yeah, accountability, all those things that I know we talked about during a panel today. So you talked about interoperability. I know that's something that can be tough to do when you're scaling. So what are the friction points there? How are you overcoming them?
That's a great question. Again, I go back to those 7 warfighting functions because I think it's so critical. If you think about where we need to be interoperable, where we need to integrate with the rest of the joint force, that's very much bounded by those 7 warfighting functions. It's like in my own particular functional area, intelligence, I realize that if we're going to be operationally effective, we have got to be able to operate as part of the joint intelligence enterprise. And sometimes there's some give and take. We know that there are some physical things that affect us, such as the need to be able to operate at sea far away from the sort of high bandwidth comms that are pretty common throughout the rest of the joint force. Maybe some of the realities of the particular target set, but in general, what I'm finding is that we have more in common than we tend to think. And as long as you really try to focus on those areas of commonality, then I think interoperability becomes just a very natural thing.
Yeah, I know the turf war stuff can be overblown, but I know it's can be a concern as well.
And if you think about what we've done with networks over the last 20, 30, 40 years, so much better than we were. And a lot of it was, I think we realized as an enterprise that we stood to gain by working together. And so where we are today with our major networks, the major IP networks, again, I'm very proud of what we've achieved since the early 1990s.
Yeah, a lot has evolved and a lot has progressed for sure. I want to end on the data quality thing just because the garbage in, garbage out. Something that I've talked about a lot today. So any AI initiative is going to need to have that governance sort of set out. So how are you approaching that, and what progress is made to have good, clean data?
It's a great question. So a lot of it begins with taxonomy, in that if we're really trying to do things like model out either an adversary naval force or own naval force, we need to agree on some pretty common terms. A cruiser needs to be a cruiser, a rowboat needs to be a rowboat. And so I think we've put a lot of emphasis, and in a very productive way over the years, on making sure that there's a common lexicon, maybe even a common taxonomy. The other, this is where I think the human-machine teaming really comes into play, and that a good analyst can really help us to make sure that what we have put into the corpus of data as tag data is indeed our best understanding of what's happening. And that includes not only making sure that our own sensors have been as accurate as possible, but that we're not being deceived by the adversary's efforts. And a little bit of what we talked about in the panel with maritime domain awareness is kind of that ongoing game of trying to make sure that if somebody is attempting to deceive, and we see that even in the news this week, that we properly reflected that in the database so we don't get fooled again.
Yeah, you got to make sure that that is all on the up and up, of course.
Exactly.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Always great.